In the dimly lit corridors of the Baltimore State Hospital for the Criminally Insane, the air hung heavy with a suffocating silence, pierced only by the occasional clatter of distant footsteps. Dr. Hannibal Lecter, a man whose intellect was as sharp as his appetite for flesh, resided in a cell that resembled a tomb more than a room. His eyes, dark and calculating, sparkled with a sinister delight as he meticulously arranged the sparse contents of his space, each item a testament to his twisted genius. When young FBI trainee Clarice Starling arrived, her heart raced with a mix of fear and determination. She was tasked with interviewing the notorious cannibal in hopes of unraveling the mind of another serial killer, one who had eluded capture for far too long. The moment she entered his cell, the atmosphere thickened with an unspoken tension, as if the very walls were privy to the dark secrets shared within. Lecter's voice, smooth and unsettling, broke the silence. He dissected her past with surgical precision, exposing vulnerabilities she had tried so hard to bury. Each question he posed felt like a knife, cutting deeper into her psyche. Clarice fought to maintain her composure, aware that revealing too much could empower the predator before her. The chess game between them intensified, with Lecter deftly manipulating the board, drawing her in, and leaving her vulnerable yet compelled to engage. Outside his cell, the world seemed distant and insignificant, the horrors of the outside pale compared to the monster within. Clarice's nights were filled with nightmares, the chilling laughter of Lecter echoing in her mind as she delved deeper into the mind of a killer. As days turned into weeks, their exchanges grew increasingly complex, and the line between hunter and hunted began to blur. Clarice found herself entangled in Lecter's web of psychological games, each session revealing not only the depths of his madness, but also the darkness lurking within her own soul. The bond they forged was as intoxicating as it was terrifying. She was both repulsed and fascinated by his brilliance. Meanwhile, the clock ticked ominously as the killer they sought continued to evade capture, his reign of terror spreading further into the heart of the city. With every detail Lecter revealed, Clarice felt the weight of her responsibility grow heavier, the lives of innocents hanging in the balance. In a climactic moment, Lecter made a chilling proposition, one that would force Clarice to confront her deepest fears. He offered insight into the mind of the killer, but only in exchange for his own freedom. Clarice's instincts screamed to refuse, but the desperation to save lives pushed her to consider the impossible. In that moment, she realized that the true horror lay not just in the monster lurking outside, but in the monster that stirred within, fed by ambition, guilt, and an insatiable thirst for understanding. The final confrontation loomed, a dark dance between predator and prey, where the stakes were life and death, sanity and madness, echoing the sinister legacy of those who danced in the shadows of silence. As Clarice grappled with Lecter's chilling offer, she felt the weight of her choices pressing down like a vice. The echo of his voice lingered in her mind, each syllable a reminder of the depths to which she would have to sink. She needed him, but how much of herself was she willing to sacrifice? The city outside continued to shudder under the threat of the elusive killer, a shadow lurking just out of reach. Time slipped through her fingers, and with it, the lives of potential victims. In the days that followed, the interviews grew darker, more intimate. Lecter seemed to relish her turmoil, his sharp wit laced with mockery as he expertly pried open her deepest insecurities. "You think you can save them, Clarice?" he taunted, his eyes glinting with malice. But can you save yourself? Each session was a psychological battlefield, and she fought fiercely to maintain control. Yet with each revelation, she felt herself becoming more entwined in his dark allure. As she prepared for another session, Clarice caught a glimpse of her reflection in a cracked mirror. The woman staring back was resolute yet haunted, her determination tinged with fear. She wondered how much of her soul Lecter had already claimed. In her mind, his voice became a siren's call, urging her deeper into the labyrinth of his intellect. She knew she needed to keep him engaged, to hold on to whatever thread connected them, if only to glean the insight necessary to catch the killer. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, she returned to his cell. The air was thick with an electric tension. Lecter was waiting, his expression unreadable. "Clarice," he began, his voice smooth as silk, "have you ever wondered what it truly means to understand evil?" He leaned closer, his breath a whisper against the confines of the cell. "It means embracing it, becoming one with it, It means knowing its taste. She shivered but pushed through the discomfort. Tell me about him, Hannibal. The killer. What makes him tick? Lecter's smile widened, revealing just a hint of his predatory nature. Ah, but my dear, you must first show me you're worthy of such knowledge. I can help you, but it will come at a cost. The game was on, and the stakes had never been higher. Days turned into a perilous negotiation of power. Clarice, driven by desperation, began to share parts of her own story, her childhood, the trauma that shaped her. With each confession, Lecter's interest deepened, and he crafted a grotesque tapestry of her fears and desires, weaving them into a complex understanding of her psyche. Yet, with each session, she felt a part of herself slipping away, consumed by the darkness she was exploring. As their psychological dance reached its zenith, Lecter made a calculated move. He hinted at knowing the killer's next target, a chilling revelation that sent shivers down Clarice's spine. You must make a choice, Clarice. Trust me, and I will lead you to him. But in return, you must promise to embrace the darkness that lies within you. The ultimatum hung in the air, and she felt torn. Could she truly confront the beast lurking within, or would it consume her? The realization struck her. Lecter was not just a key to solving the case, he was also a mirror, reflecting the very parts of herself she feared. Clarice steeled herself. If I do this, it's to save lives. Nothing more. Ah, but you see, Lecter purred. The line between savior and monster is often blurred. The clock was ticking, and with each moment, the killer remained free, a ghost haunting the city. Clarice had to decide whether to navigate the treacherous path Lecter laid out before her or risk losing everything to the darkness that threatened to engulf them both. In a final, fateful encounter, she resolved to confront the killer head-on. Armed with Lecter's insights, she stepped into the shadows, the echoes of his voice guiding her. The hunt was on, but she was no longer just a hunter, she was a player in a deadly game, one that would either redeem her or destroy her entirely. As the night fell and the city held its breath, Clarice ventured forth, ready to confront not only the killer but also the monstrous parts of herself that Lecter had so expertly unveiled. As Clarice stepped into the night, the city loomed like a labyrinth, its streets twisted and dark, echoing her inner turmoil. Every shadow seemed alive, whispering doubts that clawed at her resolve. She thought of the faces of the victims, their lives stolen by the unseen killer. Each one was a reminder of her mission, a fuel that pushed her forward, yet also a chain that bound her to the weight of her choices. She had equipped herself with a profile crafted from Lecter's chilling insights, fragments of the killer's psyche that painted a portrait of madness and desperation. The strategy was simple: lure him out, catch him off guard, but the risk loomed large. Would she be ready to confront not only the killer but the darkness within herself that Lecter had so artfully exposed? As she navigated the alleys, she felt a strange sense of clarity. The air was thick with anticipation, every sound amplified in the silence: the rustle of leaves, the distant hum of traffic, and the soft thud of her own heartbeat. Her mind flickered back to Lecter's words, urging her to embrace her instincts, to allow the primal part of her to emerge. Could she become the predator she needed to be, or would she falter, drowning in fear? A sudden movement caught her attention, a figure darting into the shadows ahead. Clarice's pulse quickened as she followed, adrenaline surging through her veins. The chase was both exhilarating and terrifying, every step echoing with the ghosts of her past. As she rounded a corner, she found herself in a deserted square, illuminated by the flickering light of a street lamp. The figure was gone, swallowed by the darkness, but she felt a presence lingering just beyond her sight. "Show yourself," she called out, her voice steady, masking the turmoil inside. Silence answered, stretching painfully as she gripped her weapon tighter. She scanned her surroundings, instinctively aware that she was not just hunting a killer, she was hunting for control over her own demons. Then, from the shadows, he emerged, the killer. His demeanor was unsettlingly calm, a smile curling on his lips that sent a chill racing down her spine. "Ah, Agent Starling," he drawled, his voice dripping with mockery. "I've been expecting you." "Where are the others?" she demanded, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. He chuckled, a low, sinister sound. "You're here to save them. but you should know it's too late for most. They've already become part of the game. In that moment, she saw the twisted reflection of Lecter in him, intelligent, calculating, reveling in the power of the hunt. But this was not just a confrontation, it was a test. Clarice felt the darkness within her stirring. A whisper of the monster Lecter had awakened. "Stop playing games," she said, forcing herself to take a step forward, feeling the weight of Lecter's influence guiding her actions. "You're not in control anymore." "Ah, but that's where you're wrong," he replied, stepping closer, his gaze piercing. "Control is an illusion, dear Clarice. And you, like me, are merely a player in this horrific theatre." The tension escalated, and Clarice realized the true battle was not just against him but within herself. The remnants of her training battled against the siren call of vengeance and fear. She remembered Lecter's voice, urging her to embrace her instincts, to become the predator, not the prey. With a deep breath, she steadied her aim. This ends now. In that instant, the world around her narrowed to the two of them, the killer and the agent, transformed by her own dark journey. The shot rang out, echoing through the night, shattering the silence as the killer staggered back, surprise etched across his face. She had acted, and in that moment of clarity she felt a surge of power coursing through her. But as he fell, the reality of her actions hit her hard. She had crossed a line, and the darkness that had been creeping at the edges of her consciousness surged forward. The killer lay motionless, and in the silence that followed, Clarice felt an unsettling kinship with the monster she had just defeated. In the aftermath, as she stepped away from the scene, the weight of her choices pressed upon her anew. She had saved lives, but at what cost? The lines between savior and monster blurred, and she could still hear Lecter's voice whispering in the recesses of her mind, reminding her that understanding evil meant acknowledging the darkness within. Returning to the hospital, she felt both triumphant and haunted. Lecter awaited her, his gaze piercing as she recounted the night's events. "You've taken your first step into the abyss, Clarice," he remarked, his voice smooth and deliberate. "But remember, the abyss gazes back." With every word she understood the real horror was not just in the act of killing, but in the transformation it wrought within her. The darkness was now a part of her, and she would have to confront it every day moving forward. The dance with evil had only just begun, and as she looked into Lecter's eyes, she realized they were bound together in this nightmarish waltz, both seeking understanding in the shadows of their own making. As Clarice stood before Lecter, the weight of her choices hung heavily in the air, thick with the scent of blood and fear. The sterile walls of the hospital felt like a prison, yet within them lay a dark sanctuary where she had come to understand the monster lurking inside her. She searched Lecter's gaze, a mixture of defiance and uncertainty swirling within her. "Did you enjoy the hunt?" he asked, his tone almost playful, a predator savoring a fresh kill. Her breath hitched as she considered the question, the thrill of the chase echoing in her mind. "I did what I had to do," she replied, her voice firm but trembling. "To save lives." "But at what cost?" Lecter leaned closer, his eyes glinting with a knowing gleam. "You took a life, Clarice. That changes everything." The reality of his words sank in, and she felt the creeping shadow of doubt settle around her shoulders like a shroud. "You told me to embrace the darkness," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if I can't control it?" "That is the true horror," he replied, his smile unsettling. "To know that the darkness is now a part of you. It festers, it feeds, and it waits for the moment to consume you whole." Clarice stepped back, grappling with the churning emotions within. The memories of the killer's final moments replayed in her mind, his shock, the lifeblood seeping into the ground, the finality of it all. Had she truly saved anyone, or had she simply become another monster in the night? "You were always stronger than you believed," Lecter continued, his voice almost soothing. "But strength can be a double-edged sword. With it comes the capacity for violence. The question is, what will you do with that power?" "I'll use it to protect others," she asserted, fighting against the tide of despair threatening to pull her under. "I won't let myself become like him." Perhaps he mused, tilting his head in contemplation. "But remember, control is a fleeting illusion. You may find yourself drawn back into the abyss you so valiantly wish to escape." The moment hung heavy between them, each word a reminder of the darkness that now dwelled within her. Clarice turned away, her heart pounding as she struggled to process everything she had become. Clarice Lecter called softly, his voice cutting through the fog of her thoughts. "You are not alone in this. We are bound by our understanding of what lies beneath the surface. Embrace it, and you may find strength in the shadows." With one last look at him, she turned and walked toward the exit, her footsteps echoing in the sterile hall. Each step felt like a promise to herself, a promise to fight against the darkness, to channel it into something meaningful. The knowledge of her own capacity for evil would always linger, but she wouldn't let it define her. As she stepped outside into the cool night air, the city stretched before her, a sprawling tapestry of light and shadow. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the world on her shoulders, but also a flicker of hope igniting within her. She would confront the darkness, not just in herself but in the world, using her experiences to forge a path toward redemption. In that moment, she understood the journey ahead would be fraught with challenges, but she was ready to embrace the complexities of her existence. She would not shy away from the shadows. Instead, she would learn to navigate them with purpose. And as she walked into the night, the darkness no longer felt like a suffocating weight, it felt like an ally, a reminder of the strength that lay within her. Behind her, in the hospital, Lecter watched with a predatory gaze, the corners of his mouth curving into a satisfied smile. He knew this was just the beginning, a dance that would continue in the shadows, intertwining their fates as they both sought understanding in a world steeped in horror. And in that darkness, Clarice Starling would emerge, transformed, ready to face whatever came next,